Now it's time to talk about Center. Now this is a very interesting plugin in the mastering sense because it allows us to rebalance things which ordinarily you wouldn't be able to do with a finished stereo mix. Center uses MS processing, also known as mid-side processing, to do its magic, and that's a way of allowing it to separate the center information from the information on the sides of the stereo image. Now, MS processing itself is not new. It's been around for years, and there's plenty of other plugins on the market that allow you to manipulate the mids and the sides independently. But what's unique about Center is that there's a lot of things going on under the hood that actually make the process not only easier, but do a bunch of things that you can't just mock up yourself with a lot of other plugins. There's actually some engineering in there to do some unique and never before done things. Let's have a little listen on this song here, and what we'll be able to do is actually lower the level of vocals in the mix and clever tricks like that. So let's have a listen now. We're basically at a unity setting here. Now by lowering this center level here, have a listen to what happens. So all the stuff in the middle of the mix is going down in volume. Now that also includes the drums and the bass or whatever else you might happen to have right up the middle. But the vocal level's virtually down there, listen. Now, again, this is one of these things that you can abuse. If I take the center all the way down, we're going to be left with an out of phase effect on just the sides. So I'll do that. And that is pretty hairy. And, largely unusable. But using this in smaller amounts is just the ticket. So let's just say our problem with this track is that the vocal is too hot. We just want to pull it down just a couple of dB. Okay, well, I've pulled this fader down now, 3, and that vocal level's definitely dropped. I'll just bypass. Okay, so the vocal level's certainly come down, so we've achieved that aim, but now we're going to need to use some of these controls here to distribute the energy back to either the center or the sides that we've removed. So in this case, we've pulled this down, so we've removed some of the bass and the kick drum out of that center position. So what we can do here is now redistribute that we've taken away and feed it off to the sides a bit. Now, to make this more obvious, I'll pull this down a substantial amount and we'll listen to the difference. Okay, now that's too much, but let's now throw all the energy to the sides. And all the way back. So listen to the bottom end. In, out. So I can redistribute that off to the sides to make up for what I've taken away from the center. And a better example might be the top end, or the punch control here, which distributes the transient information between the center and the sides. So in the example I've laid up here, we've pulled the center down, so the click and snap from the snare has obviously been reduced. We can use the high frequency knob and the punch to send some of that out to the sides so it's not totally gone. So let's have a listen to that. And I'll do it from a control surface so I can move the two of them together. So I've got the high and the punch, pull them right out. Now listen, I'll go in. I'll get some snare here. Go back out. So there's no snap on the snare at all now. Now back in. Now remember, of course, that I'm exaggerating this by pulling this down a whole heap, so we're doing that just so the effect is more pronounced. So ordinarily with that 3 dB example I gave before, we can feed some highs and some punch back into the mix to make up for what we took out. Now let's have a look at the side control here, which is the exact opposite. In fact, I'll just reset everything to its normal state. So this is the opposite. This is going to pull out the sides and effectively render you with a mono performance. So let's have a listen. Now those backing vocals, for instance, are all sounding weird because they were very widespread, so they've closed down. Now the opposite extreme here can be we can take these highs and redistribute them to the center. And whatever bottom end happened to be at the side, probably not much, but... And all the punch that the sides might have had, we can push that back into the center. That's probably not making a huge difference here because the sides wouldn't have been rich in kind of transients. It would have been mainly kind of wash and backing vocal type stuff. So it's not as obvious doing it in this direction, but the principle is still the same, and depending on your track, it might be more variable. So now just a quick overview of the rest of the parameters in the plugin. We've dealt with our knobs up here except for the master, and that's just an output. So if, for instance, you're pushing the center up really hot, the sides down, whatever, it might start to overload, so you can pull that down. Easy fix. You've got your metering here, which is showing you the output metering. So you're seeing the metering effect after you've made your controls, as opposed to this meter down here marking the centering. But this actually operates the opposite of what I would have natively thought. If I play now from a reset position again, it looks like it's kind of a width meter, but what it's actually doing is the exact opposite of that. And if we're in a mono situation, and I'll do that by centering the two pans up here, it actually goes fully out. So it's the opposite of what I certainly thought. When the centimeter is showing its widest thing, we're actually in mono, and when the left and right are very discrete and separate from each other, it'll actually be very thin. So I'll put this back to the wideness there. And just so we know, this centimeter is actually operating after the punch control, but before everything else. So the punch control will come first in the circuit. So to prove that, we can make all sorts of weird changes here, and that meter's not changing at all. I've pulled everything down. And it's only adjusting this punch meter which will affect it. Now you won't be able to see that because it'll probably be too subtle. Oh no, there we go. So I've thrown that out to the sides and it's got quite small, and out the other way, and it's wider, which is implying that it's a bit more mono because I've pushed the punch into the center there. Now Waves have provided some presets here so we can look at some examples of some of the effects that they suggest. And these will just be starting points, of course, depending on the track. But just to give you an idea, you can go less vocal, dry ambience. So, we'll take Waves preset for less vocal and see what that does. And they've made their own estimates of the low, high and punch controls here as well. So bypass, definitely less vocal on that lead. Listen to that. Okay, then there's dry ambience. So that's going to really just push up the center. So that one fairly obvious. And one more simply designed as an effect is side effects. And that's done the opposite. Pushed up the sides very hot, pushed down the center to 0, and then pushed all the power here to the sides except for the punch. So it's removed the punch from the sides. So it's going to be a bit of a wash, I think. Just unbypass here. Yeah, so no smack, no punch. So that's the center plugin. And the next movie is going to be the last of our ones talking about the plugins in this bundle before we move to some actual mastering. And that's the Doro metering package. See you there.